Good day everyone. So in this video we'll be going over how to click and drag a UI element. So if I click play here to give you an example, we have an image, some text and a panel. And just to show you another scene here, to show you that this does indeed work with different combinations of pivot settings, including Shift and Alt. I click play on this one. You can see that they still move, and they move with the mouse gracefully. That one out of the way. This one, and this one. So that's what we'll be doing today. If you'd like to jump straight to the code, it's in the description for you. And let's begin. Okay, so starting from an empty scene, so you know there's no magic going on in the background, we will create our canvas and our UI elements. Now we're just going to create two, text and an image, just so we have something to grab onto and mess with. So let's move this text here on the left. Doesn't matter what it says, I'm just going to say 500 by 500. You sit there, perfect. And then I will go canvas, create image, and we will add that to the right. So if we go to the game view, there you go. So now we have two elements that we can test clicking and dragging on. The last thing we need to do in the scene now is create our player object to house our script. And we will create a script. I'm going to call it UI drag. And I will attach that to my player. And there we go. So let's open this up. Okay, I'm just going to get rid of these two comments here. Okay, so our script will have two core parts. The first part will be, when I click the screen, tell me what UI element I have clicked on. Okay, now the second part will be, take that UI element and I want it to move with the mouse. So the second part will be the movement. Now the only thing that we need to reference from the scene directly for this will be the canvas. And that's because when we do our raycast, the canvas already has a graphics raycaster on it, so we're going to make use of that. So let's grab that first. So we'll say public game object, and then I'll say UI canvas. Just save that, go back to my scene. And on the player object here, I can drag this canvas in to this slot. So if I click on canvas, you can see there's a graphics raycaster component here. So we're going to make use of this on our script. So let's open that back up. Now we have our UI canvas. Let's get the raycaster from it. So graphic raycaster is the type, and we'll say UI raycaster. That's what the name of our variable will be. Now to use this, we have to use the namespace using Unity engine.ui, and that's for the graphics raycaster. Now when this script starts up, the first thing we want to do is populate this raycaster. So we're going to say UI raycaster equals UI canvas dot get component of type graphic raycaster. Close that off. Okay, so now we have our graphics raycaster. Now when we do the raycast, we're going to need the point data, so it's the input, the mouse position, and we're going to need somewhere to store our raycast results. So I'm going to say pointer event data, click data. This will house our mouse position that we give to the raycaster. And then I'm going to say list of raycast results and click results. Now to use this object here and this one, we're going to need another namespace. So we'll say using Unity engine dot event systems, and then let's initialize those in the startup. So we'll say click data equals a new point event data, and we'll say event system dot current. Now don't worry too much about this. This is just what you have to pass through. And then we'll say click results equals a new list of type raycast result. Brand new list. Okay. Okay, so now we have all our raycast variables here ready to go. We will leave them there for a moment and we'll come back to them later when we do the raycast. Because before that, we're going to set up a few core functions to house some logic before we get to the raycasting section. So next we're going to, in the update here, we're going to say mouse drag UI. We're going to create a new function. And this is so that we can keep our update function as clean as possible. So we'll say void mouse drag UI. And the very first piece of logic that should run with this script should be get the mouse position. So we'll say here mouse position equals mouse dot current dot position dot read value. So in this script we will be assuming that we're using the default mouse here and the left button. So let's go ahead and add our mouse position here. So I'm adding it here so we have access to the mouse position variable throughout the entire script. And also to access this mouse.current.position, we'll need to add another namespace using Unity engine.input system. That's because we're using the new input system in this script. Okay, save that. Okay, so next, now we have the mouse position. We want to know, has the mouse been clicked? Before we do any raycasting, we're waiting for the user or the gamer to click on the mouse. So if mouse.current.left button was pressed this frame, and then I'm going to create a new function here called detect UI. So we're saying if the mouse was clicked, now I want you to go ahead and detect if I have clicked a UI element. So we will go ahead and make that new function void detect UI. Okay, so this detect UI function will be a small one, but what it's going to do is first detect whether we have clicked on the UI, and if we have, turn on dragging mode. So let's create a new function here called get UI elements clicked. Similar to our previous video where we're just figuring out what we're clicking on. So we'll make this function here, void get UI elements clicked. And now this is where our raycasting will be in this one. So remember, when we use our graphics raycaster, we're going to want to pass it a pointer event data, including the current mouse position. So we'll say click data dot position equals mouse position. So we are updating our pointer event data here with the current mouse position. Then I'm going to say click results dot clear. So just to make sure that our list of results is empty and ready for new results every time. And then lastly we'll say UI raycaster dot raycast, and we will give that the click data and the click results list to populate. Now this is pretty much it for the raycast itself. However, the click results, when it comes out, it will be a list of raycast results, whereas I prefer to use a list of game objects. I feel like it's a bit easier to work with. So we're going to iterate through our results and put this into a new list of game objects. So there's two ways to do this. We can either loop through it manually and add it to a new list, or if you're familiar with Python, there is another way that's looks like list comprehension in a way. It's like a one-liner. So I will show you how to do both, and then you can pick whichever one you prefer. So just use comments. This will be the for each version, and we'll say, let's go up here and just add a new list of game objects, and we'll call this clicked elements. This will be so we can give the entire script access to the elements we have clicked on. Okay, and now we can populate that the same way we have done with our clicked results. So we'll say clicked elements equals new list of game objects. so we just initialize that once. And then we'll come down here and we'll say the for each version will be, so we'll do clicked results.clear to make sure our list is empty and ready for new results. And then we'll say for each raycast result in click results. So when this ray has fired and populated this list with all the results of anything it's hit, I'm going to go through and say for each one of those hits, I just want the game object. So I'll say clicked elements dot add, and then I'll do result dot game object with a lowercase g. Okay, so that has populated our clicked elements with game objects. So this is the for each version. Now just to show you the optimized version or the list comprehension version, so I'm saying optimized version, you could also do clicked elements equals from result in click results, select result dot game object, and then to list. So this fancy piece of code here, what it's actually going to do is pretty much similar to this piece of code here, but it's in one line, and it's saying for each result in my results, make a new list of whatever I tell it to here. So I'm saying make a new list of game objects. However, this will not return a list, it will return an IEnumerable object, which is read only, but I personally prefer to work with lists. So you can encompass this in brackets and say .toList, and that will convert our IEnumerable to a list for us. So you can see this is all in one line. But if you want to know what it's doing, you can pretty much just look at this. It's the same thing. It's just this is a more manual way of doing it, but it's an easier way to understand what's going on. So I'll comment this out, but I will leave it there just in case you wish, to use that bit instead. Okay. So when this piece of code here is run, I will populate my clicked elements list with the list of UI elements that I have clicked. Great. Now I want to check, part of my detect UI function, I want to check if anything has been returned in that click, to check if I have actually clicked on any UI elements. So we will say if clicked elements dot count is greater than 0. So if there is at least one thing I have clicked on, I want to say dragging equals true, and I want to say drag element equals clicked elements 0. So I'm pretty much saying the first thing I click on is the thing I want to be dragging. And then dragging equals true is I'm kind of saying now I'm in dragging mode, which this function here is going to make use of. So notice how I haven't specified the type. That's because I want these to be universal to the whole script. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to say bool dragging equals false, and that will be telling the script whether or not we're in dragging mode. And also we'll say game object drag element, and that will tell the entire script which element is currently being dragged. So now on update we run our master function here. Our master function says if you've clicked the mouse, I want you to check if you've clicked on anything on the UI, which in turn will do a raycast here, and it will check and it will populate our clicked elements with any UI object that we've clicked on. And then after that, we'll say if we have clicked on anything, then we want to start dragging, and this is the object we want to be dragging. Okay, so these two functions are done. So we'll go back up to our mouse drag UI. Okay, so if we have clicked on a UI element, now we start dragging. Okay, so the next piece of code we're going to want to add here is, now you've clicked and now you've got an UI element, are you holding the mouse down? Are you dragging that element across the screen? Or have you released the mouse button? So we'll say if mouse dot current dot left button, again, dot is pressed. So that's kind of saying, is the mouse button being held down on this frame, and then we'll say and dragging. So is the mouse being held down and are we in dragging mode? And then we'll create a new function here called drag element. So if we are in dragging mode and we're holding the mouse down, then move the element around that we're dragging. And then we're going to say else, nope. Else, I want you to set dragging mode to false. So if the mouse is no longer being held down, pretty much tell the script that we're not in dragging mode anymore, which resets everything back up to here, and then it starts to wait for the mouse to be pressed again. Okay, so our new drag element function here, let's go ahead and create that. So down here, void drag element. Again, this will be another small function to help break up the functionality. So we have our element being dragged. We know that we're holding the mouse down. So the next thing to do is to make sure that when the mouse moves, the UI element moves. Right, so the first thing we need to do with this UI element is we need to get its transform. But because we're thinking in 2D space on the canvas, it's going to have a rect transform. So we'll gain access to that. We'll say rect transform. I'm going to say element rect equals our current drag element, get component, rect transform. Okay, so now we have the thing that we're going to be moving around the screen, this rect transform right here. Okay, so before we can move it, we need to know how are we going to move it. So moving a UI element around the screen can be quite difficult because they've all got different positions, size, heights and everything, but they've also all got different anchors and pivots. But fortunately, if we just stay true to the mouse movement, we don't have to worry about any of that, which is quite nice. So what we will be doing is, say we have our cursor in the middle of the screen. When you move your cursor to the left, we record that movement, that difference between frame 1 and frame 2, and then we apply that difference to our dragged UI element. And then what you'll notice is they seem to move together. So we'll go ahead and get that. We'll say vector2 drag movement, and that will be the difference between the mouse's current position now and the mouse's previous position on the last frame. So we'll say previous mouse position. Now of course we don't have this one yet, so we will go ahead, go up here, and we'll add another vector3, previous mouse position, and then we'll populate that. So pretty much in our master function here, the first thing I want to do is get the mouse position, do the logic, and then right at the end I want to then store that mouse position as the previous mouse position of the last frame. So every time it executes, it will say here's the new position. It will use that new position and the previous mouse position from the last frame, and then right at the end of the execution it will then store our current mouse position for use on the next frame. Okay, so we scroll back down here. So our drag movement will be the difference between the mouse position now and the mouse position the last frame. And we can then apply that same drag movement here onto our UI element, which will make our UI element move just the same way the mouse did. So to do that, we'll say element rect dot anchored position. Now anchored position seems to work best because of all the different anchors and pivots you can set. And we'll say element rect anchored position equals its old position plus drag movement. So you can see what I've done is I've worked out how the mouse has moved, I've stored that, and then I've applied that same movement onto the UI element rect. Okay, so this is pretty much the final code here. Now something to keep in mind with the new input system, the mouse here, it does give us a delta position. Now I have tried that here. I have tried saying anchor position equals the previous position plus the delta, but I find that it's not reliable at all. If you were to click and hold your mouse in the middle of your UI element, then you move it around erratically and move your mouse back to the middle of the screen, you'll notice that your UI element would have shifted a little bit. Whereas doing it like this code here, no matter how much you shake your mouse, the UI element will always stay stuck to your mouse, which is really good. It's really consistent. So let's go ahead and test this and see what errors come up. So we'll save that. Go back to our game. Go to the console. Seems to be good. Let's click on play. Also, we got an error here. You were trying to read input using the old class. Okay. Well, it's saying input systems standalone modules. So that's probably, wow, here we go. So when this event system object here was created, this wasn't updated to the new input system. So I can click replace there, and I can try and play that again. Click play. Again, you have to remember, any changes you make during runtime will not be saved. So I should click play and then make my changes. Otherwise, I'll have to do it twice, as you saw. Okay, third time's the charm. Click play. Cool, no errors. Now let's click on the text. Beautiful. Look at that. And we'll click on our image. Beautiful. So what I was saying before about the dragging it and going crazy, if I was to click right in the middle of this E letter here, shake it around, and then I move it back, you can see how my cursor is still in the middle of the E. It's exactly where I clicked it, which is great. That's exactly what we want. And same with this. We'll grab the top left corner, we'll shake it about, and there we go. It's still in the top left corner. So we'll go back to the code quickly. Now do keep in mind, this is best working for panels, windows, and texts, not for things like buttons and sliders, because what it will do here, as you can see on line 65, it will use the first element clicked. So when you click on a button, it's going to grab the text of the button and move the text around. So if you want to grab things like buttons and move them around, you're going to have to implement another layer of logic for the button, or I would recommend having the button as a child underneath something like a panel, and then you move the panel around, which will move the button. Okay, so one thing I forgot to add is here. Now this line here, the list comprehension, if you do want to use this, there's one more namespace you're going to need to use, and that will be using system.link, and that will enable that for you. Now let's very quickly add a one-line docstring to everything. This is just so we can go over the code once more and make a note of what's going on. Now docstrings probably should have multiple lines, but just to be brief and get straight to the point, I'm just going to do one line. So our master function here, mouse drag UI. So we'll go ahead and say here, houses the main mouse dragging logic. Because it does, it's like an overview function. And then we'll go down to our detect UI function and we will say here, detect if the mouse has been clicked on a UI element and begin dragging. So this function here checks if we've clicked something and then activates dragging mode if we have. This function here, get UI elements clicked, it will get all the UI elements clicked using the current mouse position and raycasting. Top. And lastly, our drag element function here, we will say drag a UI element across the screen based on the mouse movement. Okay, so now just to be super thorough to make sure the code works, and we're going to test this line here as well. So I will open that up and I will comment that out. Save it. We'll go back to our scene. Make sure there's no errors. That's good. Click play. And there we go. Things move around. Perfect. And then just to be even more sure, we'll say our text here. We will pick a random one of these. I'm going to say this one while holding down shift. and then I'm going to say on my image, we're going to say this one while holding down Alt, just so you get a different combination of anchor presets here. We'll click play, and then as you can see, they still move with the mouse, and this one is huge. But there we go. That is the end of this tutorial. I hope that's been helpful for you, and I hope you can create some wonderful things with that code, or use it to inspire your own code. Please like and subscribe if you would like to. And thank you for watching. I'll see you guys next time.